thank you very much, dear Alessia, dear Steffi, and DLD for having us on the topic of sustainability. I'm a passionate European, as many of you know, and we've spoken many times about Europe's biggest challenges. So we've spoken about the digital transition, digital single market, the Pact for Skills, we've spoken about migration and stability. And sustainability, I think, is the biggest yet of all, because it's literally a whole society undertaking to do this. So it's the governments who actually set the ambition, it's the industry who will get granular and deliver on the ambition, like we've just heard also from our host at BMW. And of course, it's down to the individuals and society actually to accelerate those changes, demand more and do more as we go ahead. When the EU Commission announced its ambitions for a net zero Europe, it was actually the first continent to go net zero by 2050. And announcing this was something I found personally very inspiring, and we as an institution found very inspiring, because it's very bold. It was the first continent actually to set that ambition. So target setting, as we've just heard in any good transformation, good target setting. Secondly, it wired it hard in regulation, and binding regulation with a timetable and measures behind it actually to get to 2050. And last but not least, there's financing behind it. Now you can argue 1 trillion is probably not enough to transform an entire continent with complex industries and member states. However, it's a very valuable and important start also for industry to engage in. So this is all great as a start. High ambition, regulation, and also funding underneath it as the first continent to go for net zero. However, this is complicated to actually then do it. So while we haven't had the aspiration, now we actually do need a plan. And Europe in itself is a very complex thing. And we're going to highlight a bit of the complexities, what it now needs to do this and to overcome before we go on pathways, actually economically sound pathways, how to achieve that with industry, but then also what it means in socioeconomic effects. So complexity, why is this so complex? Well, it's obviously complex. Europe is a complex continent, and we all need to move in the same direction. So what we're seeing right here is the pathway of Europe going to net zero along member states. It's a member state direction. So we're seeing what's indexed as the 1990 emissions as a standard baseline, and we're seeing how member states are actually moving towards this, and then we see the ambition to the very right-hand side to actually get to net zero by 2050. So we see lots of complexity in terms of member states, different economies, different electoral cycles, different industry structure, different labor markets. So this is complex as a member state or as any individual country. We talk about Germany in a minute, where we did a deep dive on, to actually do this. It's equally complex, however, we could plot this also along industry. So you could get a very similar graph in terms of emissions not coming from countries and member states, but emissions coming from different sources of emissions. So mobility, we've just heard that today. The energy system as core input factor, infrastructure, agriculture, food, we've also heard that today. What do we consume and how do we use our land? So we could also, on that dimension, actually look at this and say, like, how are we moving on all those levers in concert to move to a rather ambitious target? So first, it's complex. Second, the good news is we're moving in the right direction. So when you look at the graph here, relative to 1990 emissions, we've actually reduced just above 20%, actually, we've reduced already versus the baseline. So on collective, this is good. Some reduction, right direction, bit of a complex concert. However, we're reducing and moving too slow. So while 2050, as Alessia was saying, actually does sound far away, 2030 is actually right around the corner. We always say it's a decisive decade. It's not actually a decade anymore. We're at the end of 2021, so we're talking about the next 8 years, or maybe the next 10, a decade, to actually really accelerate on that climate transition. Why is acceleration so important? Because if we don't, and if we still want to achieve that target, it's only logical that the end will be rather dramatic. So it'll be a cliff, actually. A cliff of stark trade-offs, like when you switch off what kind of production system, what kind of energy system, what does it actually mean to the livelihoods of the people and actually to the competitiveness of European industries. So these are very complex trade-offs, actually. We need to understand so we can actually manage them. And we spend a great deal of time actually understanding those trade-offs and the different levers we have and what they mean on the economic side, but also what they mean on the emission side. And my colleague Stefan is going to walk you through where we came out after a year-long research effort into the topic of net zero Europe and its pathways.
And a word of pre-warning, every McKinsey number contains, or presentation contains numbers, we stick with that, yeah. So bear with me when I introduce what we call the abatement cost curve, yeah. So we modeled every industry, every use of energy, and found the alternative pathway towards a net zero or carbon neutral means for providing that. And what you see here is basically over the entire abatement, which we as Europeans need to fulfill, this 3.5 thousand million tons, on average up to 2050. And the good news is there's a left side, where you see the negative numbers. These are actually levers and means which are positive. Better insulation of homes. Also here with BMW, switching from a combustion engine car to a battery and electric vehicle, which is just cheaper in operations, and therefore it's saving money on the long term. We might need to provide incentives by the government to actually switch to those, but in instance they are basically providing for themselves. The bad news is the right side. This is basically the hard to abate industries, the hard to abate uses of carbons. For example, aviation fuel. You need to go to synfuels. Steel, you need to go from the blast furnace to a hydrogen-based DRI, so direct reduction process for producing steel, and these cost money. So 3 messages. A, it can be done. We do have the technology, we do have the means to decarbonize Europe. B, if you compare the left side and the right side, it's basically net zero. So we can actually move to a climate neutral economy at zero net cost. But, and that's what you said, Solveig, only if we move now. Every year which we fail to implement the levers on the left side, which pay for themselves, we need to go further on the right side. And these levers get increasingly expensive up to the point where we actually need to sequester carbon from a hemisphere and then use it or store it. So every year we lose, this thing gets more and more expensive. So first message here, we can transition to a net zero economy at zero cost. And so over to you, because there's no more good news.
So while there is a net effect, of course, not everybody is winning at the same time. So it's very important actually to take this aggregate perspective into account. And one is, of course, on the climate side. But secondly, there's also an effect everybody individually feels. And we have a couple of important elections coming up, not least here in Germany, but also across Europe. And to this day, when you ask European citizens, what do they worry most about? Actually, the climate does not precede over the fact of having a job. So employment and employability is absolutely essential also to manage a socio-economic transition of that climate transition and to have on aggregate actually more winners than actually losers in this scenario. So we do think jobs can be created, like in any good disruption and like in any good transition. When you look at the digital disruption, automation, people write about this, we write about this all the time in terms of what jobs will be lost, and you see those jobs who might be lost. But there are tons of jobs who actually also will be gained. And when you look at different sectors, for instance, the building sector, also in agriculture and the power sector, we see lots of innovation that's needed. And the scale of that innovation actually will transform the industry, where we see actually additional effects on jobs. To be honest, though, we also see losses in jobs and in different industries. For instance, in transportation, everybody sees and knows this around less transportation, more autonomous transportation. But also on the industry side, when we're doing things less of and more of something else, there will be losses in jobs, individually speaking. So this is also important to be honest and look at this with foresight. However, when you combine this, there's a very strong net positive effect. And already now, or at least around the corner in 2030, we see over 2 million actually net positive jobs, effects on the labor market, granularly modeled actually by industry level, actually by skill level. So there is a net addition to this. And even by 2050, could add up to 5 million jobs in the European economy. However, it's about the transition, managing that transition, because your today's truck driver might not be actually a highly skilled electrical engineer of tomorrow. So it's very important to actually manage this with foresight, be careful on the demographics, to also make that transition, the socio-economic transition, actually beneficial for the continent, up to 5 million new jobs in Europe if we get the transition right, and its complexity and its timing.
So it's a chance. And with that, we want to announce, actually, it's the first time we do that on Friday we are publishing a new report, building on the net zero report we just introduced for Germany, because we do want to give this basically impulse just before election, and also add to how it can be done. So in this report, we basically go through each of the German industrial segments, each of our uses of energy, and charts a way, how we could foresee that our economy is actually transitioning to a net zero economy. For the energy sector, for automotive, for mobility, for agriculture, for consumer goods, everything. So Friday is a publishing date. To give you a sneak preview, what's in place, this is, for example, the picture for the energy system. So we mapped how energy and power demand will increase because we will move, for example, mobility towards electricity. We will move heat for our homes to heat pumps and other devices. And we've mapped all these kind of additional demand for power and green energy, and basically come to the conclusion that we need to double our today's power and green energy in the system. At the same time, we are actually retiring the fossil generation, we are retiring the nuclear fleet, so that we need to build massive amount of renewable energy, 400 to 650 gigawatts. It's a massive feat, But there's also options, We can import, for example, green hydrogen, very cost competitive, up to €2 per kilogram, which is in the money for pretty much everything, for mobility, for many industrial processes. That's why we think there's so many optionalities, that we can actually do it, But we do need to move now, and we need to connect the dots, And this is basically just one glimpse what we are having in stock here for Friday. So please stay tuned. I think we have some information on where this report can be found. So it would be lovely if everybody can take a look at it. Thank you.